says we're live before we're live, so maybe we actually are live. If anybody's in the chat as you guys pop in, please say something and let us know you're here and that you can hear us. But we are back for episode 39 of Beard Banter. I have actually missed a couple of weeks, which sucks. It's been a rough run the last couple of weeks, but I'm actually in Denver today, and I'm here with a good friend of mine, Marcin, and he's the CEO of and inventor of Malwarebytes. I mean, if we want to just call it what it is, and he's back for a second time. So if you don't know his early story and what got Marcin started and why he went down this path and his origin story, we covered that in a really early episode of Beard Banter. It was awesome of you to come on and be with me here when I had, I think, 3 watchers total live, I think, the entire time. But Marcin, it's great to have you here, man. If you want to do a brief introduction and kind of, we've got people here. Good stuff, seeing people pop in. So introduce yourself real quick, Marcin.
Yeah, Matt, thanks for having me back again. It's always great to chat with you here live. And so I'm the founder of Malwarebytes, started in, I'd say a basement, if you will, not a garage, but a basement. And long story short, got myself infected with a cyber threat back in 2005-06, when things were less crazy than they are now. And had to solve it myself and got really interested in cybersecurity. And I don't know, here we are, many years later, and fighting the good fight for everybody here.
Yeah. And it's funny, most of the people that I find that are passionate about cybersecurity have been punched in the face once, right? Like that's kind of the reality, at least. Hey, Eric Bowles, great to see you as well. I love the privacy settings. Greg Wilson, you're not in my intro, so I had to actually go look in LinkedIn, but great to have you here as well, Greg. Today, what we're trying to tackle, Marcin, is this kind of, what is MDR? Right. And I think to understand that, I think we have to understand that EDR does a good job, right? Endpoint detection and response, for anybody that doesn't know what that means. And it really is this understanding of a shift from, even in your early days, right, Marcin, let's make a list of what's bad, to let's make a list of what's good, to all these different variants of this kind of beginnings of heuristics. And I want to start looking at stuff to really EDR being, I guess, kind of that final maturation of that space in my mind. It's gathering logs, it's gathering all the data and telemetry about what's happening, it's correlating what it can to some extent around action trees and what's going on inside of a machine, what started what where. And it really does a very good job at that. But the threats, I think, are changing, right? So I'd love your thoughts on why is this getting harder, right? Why is an EDR not enough anymore?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you started to talk a little bit about the beginnings of, I guess the basic would be antivirus, right? Antivirus was enough. And
my good old AVG, right? Yeah, days. Or,
how about Adaware or Spybot Search and Destroy?
Yeah. Clam AV, brother.
Clam AV. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of cool ones from back in the day and a lot of inspiration that, created and formed Malwarebytes from a lot of those vendors. But look, antivirus was enough. We would write, signatures, a bunch of hashes of badware that we've seen out in the web, and even then, that seems in hindsight as stupid, right? Because you had to actually see, the threat before you could actually detect it, right? And so even then.
It was always after death, right? It was always after injury of some mass or small piece, right? For sure.
But it wasn't at that scale. We could sacrifice a few users, we could sacrifice a few businesses before, we could protect the masses. Today,
that is fair, just exposition, right, Marcin? Like that's true. You're 100% accurate. Now it could be literally a trigger today, and thousands of businesses are impacted, right? Compared
it's polymorphic, and it's polymorphic too. So things are changing between what you get infected with, what I get infected with from the same website, from the same macro in a PDF. So the world had to evolve, and heuristics, you started talking about that. Hey, Arnold, a good friend of mine as well there. He's looking for a Malwarebytes study. We'll get you one, Arnold. We'll get you one.
Be careful what you promise on here, man. They may hold you to it. So anyways.
I love it. Patient zero gets to die.
100%. We'll leave this up for a little while. That's exactly my quote.
So then, there was this middle point of where we tried to solve this with heuristics and AI and ML and, a variety of things in between. And then we kind of gave up. And I don't mean that, in any specific way. I guess as an industry, we said, look, even if we could provide 99 and 49% efficacy, we are never going to catch everything. And so we need to evolve. And so this idea of flight recording everything from every device came to be. And that's where EDR, started to shine. And, I come from the small business side of things. So like EDR is complicated. Trying to do EDR for a small business, maybe it's 50, maybe it's 100, maybe it's even 250 employees, is really difficult. So like ingesting all this data, which is by the way expensive, and then trying to display it to a user like, hey, here's like this line of events that happened. You know, it's interesting, but it's not enough. And so many vendors like us, many third-party services that don't actually provide endpoint protection themselves, created this concept of MDR, which is like, hey, we're going to help you manage that. And that's really the next phase of the evolution of endpoint protection here, I think. And it's a pretty exciting one, and one that I think will last for some time.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people watching right now, so we've got a bunch of people here. I just want to get everybody included, right? We've got Eddie Phillips. I think this way, here's a dream team. Marcin and I, before camera, we're plotting world domination, so you're not wrong, Eddie. It's
I
great,
thought we've accomplished it already, Matt.
Yeah, we're done. Security solved. We're just done. It's over. We're finished. Eric, it's always great having you here. Real Cyber Pro popped in. Great looking crew. Good to see you. Tim says those hats were dope, right? At the beanies at IT Nation, they were pretty cool. So, and then TJ, Titans of the industry. But if you have any questions in the audience, like, let's kick us off. Ask some of the hard questions. Let's dig into some of this stuff. But let's get back to the threats that are evolving. And if you think about this, right? When I first hired an MDR, I was using SentinelOne. This was probably 2014 or 15, probably somewhere in that range. And so we were fairly ahead of our time, I think, as an MSP. And we then hired SentinelOne, but we hired Jay Ryerse Carver that it ultimately sold to Continuum, ultimately sold to ConnectWise, and that's where they live today. But what I realized was this, and I'll put it simply. The first time the EDR goes off and it says, hey, we detected Mimikatz, we detected some lateralization, we detected something, it blocked it. Great. If you're thinking in AV world, in the old days, you're done. I stopped the threat. But then the next one goes off, and now it's a different tool. And I think you see where I'm going, and it blocks it. And now the next one goes off, and it's a different tool, and it blocks it. But then it stops going off. Any guess as to why it stops going off, Marcin?
Well, they've disabled it. That's part of it.
Yeah, 100%. I've gotten underneath it, right? Jason Schlegel shows all the time how he pwns by getting under kernels of AVs, getting beyond. And there's always a cat and mouse game of that fight as an EDR and MDR vendor, right? But the point is, there's a period of time in that time frame. Yeah, laptop bandit, David Jones. There's a point of time in that time frame that someone could have made a detection and a response. And the argument is, well, it detected and it responded. Did it? Did it find the hands-on keyboard? Did it know that I was actually connected remotely with a shell, that I'd gotten past it, right? And now I was doing things to try to elevate and grow permissions. Or I got, to your point, right? Hold on. I think David's referencing, I go throughout airports, Marcin, and every time I see an open laptop, I take a picture and I do a hashtag. And so David's probably referencing that. But what if I did find that laptop in the airport and I am hammering underneath that agent to get some persistence or to gain some access? But is that a fair summarization of what the gap is in that EDR to MDR translation? Is somebody could have just quarantined the machine and they would have no longer had that connectivity or capability to do the things or get the tools they needed, right? Like that's
so I feel like we've gone full circle. Remember the Target breach? Like I feel that was the beginning of the end in some ways. They had a SIM, it had thousands of events that way, thousands of events that way, and then that big red one in the middle that said you are being actively breached, do something about it.
Right.
Well, EDR is kind of the same way. It's like, here's just a bunch of alerts. That's bad. You should go do something about it. And look, we serve small businesses, 20,000 small business customers. The thing that surprised me the most as we sell EDR to these customers is the lack of response to events. Like people get antivirus, something happened, great, we've responded. EDR does not work the same way. Like we try to make decisions for the customer, for the user, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's their discretion. We need to show you something. And even as blatantly as you are being breached with 99% certainty, this is bad, click here to fix it. The events go unresponded. And so we're thinking through, okay, so how do we go solve that problem? And MDR is really just the primary solution to that. We just need to manage that for our customers because they don't get it. They just don't get it.
I wouldn't mind in a second dialing into why do you think that is? Why do you think people don't I'll tackle that in a minute, this last one here. Why do you think people don't act, Marcin? What's wrong? What's broken?
Well, some of it is just they're desensitized. If you get too many
Sure.
alerts, we know this problem, right? Too many alerts in your life, you're not going to respond to a damn one.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Part of it is confusion. And a lot of my investment over the next couple of months here is just the usability, the UX, the UI, because I actually think security, if you make it look like an aircraft cockpit, like so many people will be able to actually utilize it, right? If you can make it simpler and really clear to the user of the product that something is happening, this is what it means and what you should do about it, and create that automation to the degree that you can. I mean, we don't want to respond to something that we don't have great certainty about, but like creating that automation. But even then, you will still have some people that are just have paralysis that would rather call somebody in after the fact. And now you're talking about latency of several days. Now you're talking about, as you said, somebody already disabling PDR potentially, although very difficult to do with many products.
Right? Like hopefully not. But
no. If you're a good vendor, you've created protection capabilities of your own product.
Right,
like it's very difficult to disable Malwarebytes. Even if you're on the machine without admin access and more. But hypothetically speaking, let's say you found a way. Like you're right, Matt. Like you've lost all capability to respond at that point. Hell, if it's me and I'm confused, like hit that quarantine button and just like neuter that thing from the network. Like just get it off. Yeah. We'll figure out life out later, right?
And I think that's a difference of knowledge set, right, Marcin? Like what comes at the other end of that indecision. Right. And I think that's the difference, is that education level. I think this brings it back to kind of the reason for what MDR is. So let me tackle a few comments, because there's a lot of cool stuff coming in. So it's interesting to note, this is from Adesoji. I'm so sorry if I butchered that name, brother. I'm so sorry. Is it not interesting to note that despite all of the cool tools, a lot of environments still get compromised? Bro, preach it, 100%. I think the reason is that we think tools solve our life. They don't. We have to have them, right? But let's talk about surgery. If I go to a surgery and the doctor goes, man, I'm not believing in scalpels. I'm just going to poke this finger through your belly real quick, and we're going to pull this thing out. We have a problem, right? So in the same way, I wouldn't want somebody coming in and Marcin going, got a scalpel, let's do this thing. Nope, probably would like it to be an actual surgeon. That would make me very, very happy. I don't know if you sideline as a surgeon, Marcin. If not, probably not the best.
As a pilot, and I'll tell you a story. Like, despite all these redundancies, despite all these tools, so like the aircraft I fly has retractable gear. It's a gear lever you put down before you land. Pretty important. If you do not put the gear down, you don't want to slide in. There are seven systems that yell at you if you are configured in such a way and you have not put the gear down, and yet hundreds of gear down landings over the years. Gear up landings over the years. Gear up landings. So this thing literally screams gear. And you're like, great, we're going. So, I mean, look, despite all of these tools, despite this technology investment, are they configured right? Are they implemented right? Are they deployed across the network? That's unlikely. I mean, to find every device.
Yeah, and this is the insurer's dilemma right now. In fact, what you're pointing out is the insurer's dilemma. I won't get started on that for a 25-minute rant, because that's no good. But it is really, the problem is that you could have the same tools, and it doesn't mean that same surgery comes out the same way, right? And I think that's the point. It really is the surgeon. It really is that understanding of the operating procedures, the next steps, the procedural aspects of it. And I think end users being the ones having to make that decision is part of that challenge, right? And I think that's kind of the whole reason for when an MDR comes into play or a service provider comes into play, those kind of things. This one right here, I did want to tackle. I have to go into LinkedIn and see who that is. But how does Matt have better AV in a hotel than most streamers at home? Man, years of curation. The ugly secret was, before the pandemic, I was traveling and speaking. So you would fly somewhere, you'd speak on a Tuesday. You might get somewhere else on a Wednesday, speak that Thursday. Or you density-wise, at least for me, was only putting in a couple a week. But then after the pandemic, when we were stuck at home, I could do 5-day. And so I started doing 5-day, investing in gear, doing all those things. Well, then we started flying again. And so a year and a half ago, May of 2021, I started flying again. And then people said, but can you still do a webinar in your hotel room or at the next location? And so again, here we go into the giant Pelican case full of gear that I love, 70 pounds every flight. Anyways, that's how. It's a lot of curation. It says EDR, and if an EDR alert happens in the middle of the night, no one sees it. It still happens. I think that's probably one of the more bigger call outs to an MSP. When you think about MDR, it's managed detection and response. That's simply it. It is the second half of the endpoint detection and response, the management thereof, the human to do it. And you as an MSP can do it. You absolutely could hire the right people, bring in the right knowledge sets, or bring in the right curated knowledge sets that you need, or have paths or retainers with other people to go in and ask questions of, things like that, where you could do this. But then you start thinking about doing that 247, right? Like, and Marcin, you guys just recently built a SOC out for this endeavor. What, 40 SOC agents to accomplish the 247 at a certain amount of scale is essentially what you and I talked about before, is how much it takes.
Just to get going. I mean, it is not a cheap investment, and they are very talented individuals who are very desirable in the industry.
And they're aware of that, aren't they, right now?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, you've got to truly attract like the best people in this. Yeah. That's not easy.
Yeah, and what's wrong with MDR and EDR today? And I'll tackle this one myself, and I'll put it in a lens of a recent compromise. I won't say their name and call it out, but in the initial throes of it, and if you know, you know, right? I suppose the initial throes of it, the support structure when SentinelOne and CrowdStrike and these other threat detection systems, EDRs, were going behaviorally, this isn't okay. Behaviorally, this traffic is happening. A process spawned another process, decrypted a DLL, spawned another process, injected things, created a communication stream to a C-squared server. We can tell that was detected by behavior, because that's what EDR gets good at, right? Is surfacing those types of behaviors. But when the support structure came in, because everybody was wondering, line of business software, is this a false positive? Is this a false positive? Is this real? Right, you have downed users that now don't have their application, that are complaining, they're calling in, putting in tickets, and they're saying, I need my application back. And when you go to support, and support says, it's false positive. I'm going to tell you, restore, drop the hammer, don't worry about it, drop the defenses, put in an exclusion. That's another one of the problems, I think, in EDR, MDR, just in general, right? In the sense that you have to have someone that looks at that, even with this evidence from the vendor saying, we think this is fine, their entry-level support structure or what have you. How do you then make that decision, right? And how would you empower your SOC to say, no, we still think this is a positive and you should not restore this, when this vendor themselves are even differing, right? I'd love to pose that question, Marcin, and get your thoughts on that.
There's a lot to unpack there, right? Let's start with just the understanding of some of this stuff. Like, my average customer has hundreds of employees, not thousands.
Sure.
And they are unlikely to even have a subject matter expert on staff. They are entrepreneurs, they are, CEOs of small business. Sometimes the admin at the front desk manages our security product. So like, I come from a very different lens, where if you're using SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, you probably have an analyst that knows their stuff. My customers don't. And so they err on the side of like, the vendor is right. And so if we propose a suggestion,
most people do. Yeah.
They're more than likely to take it. Now, that's good and bad, right? Because we can be wrong, and of course, events can look suspicious. We have been wrong. We will be wrong, and events look suspicious, and so then things start to fall apart at the wheels. And like the moral of that story is, that proprietor of that warehouse or whatever will not even know what a process injection is, Matt.
No.
So
no.
What the hell am I doing?
Lateralization is a nap after lunch, right?
Like who the hell am I to say, hey bud, this process injection happened. You got to do something about it? Like, that's just going to create even more confusion. So bottom line, like, they trust the vendor, and this overlay of like humans that actually know what they're doing, subject matter experts who have done this all their lives, like, it is so critical as it pertains to EDR, because it is not a binary decision. It's just not. And
and that's the point, right? Like, when I hired Carver, when Jay and team were doing that, it's because I realized that I didn't know enough. I still would not put myself as an analyst to make that decision on a day-to-day basis. Am I smart enough to like put together some of these things and figure it out? Sure. But I wouldn't want to be the one having to make a first 0-day discussion on something and be the one to analyze it. There's people far smarter than me at that vector than I am, right, in that regard. And so I think it comes down to, and you hit the nail on the head of this, the average customer consumer is not going to know the difference.
Well, right? and many MSPs too, right? Like, a lot of MSPs were mom pop shops down the street. Like, who have gotten into security and are starting to get the expertise experience. But even then, they're managing router installs or network
Right.
installs, like
Yeah.
patching and so on. Like to get very good at EDR, it's not going to happen. Rely on an MDR specialist for that.
Yeah, 100%. And it's usually not all that expensive. I mean, really, the delineation,
No.
certainly some cost. But
Yeah.
okay, so Roddy Bergeron, and if you guys don't know Roddy's brilliant. He also is I think he's running for some kind of office somewhere too. I don't know. He's running on a post, so I don't even give him that much credit. But security and being secure isn't also just about tools. Agreed, 100%. Control frameworks aren't just additive in that respect. It's a lot of process, policy, scoping, baselining, and other governing pieces that you can't just buy a tool for currently. And Roddy's expanding this into the larger schema of the understanding of what the MSP is responsible for. And I would tag into that saying, yeah, that's what they should be doing, is setting those things. And if they can't properly scope, then partner, right? And if they can't properly get baselines, then partner or get education. There's plenty of it out there, right? There's tons of it. You have CIS writing baselines. You have all kinds of things doing that. And then other governance pieces, he's right? I think that's one of the biggest challenges. But specific to that point, you shouldn't be spending all of that money and time on hiring analysts to do SOC stuff that you have aggregations of that knowledge by the players that are out there, right? I think at the time I signed the single largest SentinelOne and management deal for $45,000 a month as an MSP in 2019 or 2020, because for me at that point, I just couldn't live with not having enough of an educated response to lean upon to say, is this actually a threat? Like, think about Emotet, if you get into that space, right? When you're talking about banking Trojans. They're at such a point where once they've been on and detected, it's time to wipe the machine. Like, how do you know that if you don't know that, right? That guidance, that understanding isn't being given by EDR, right, in that regard.
Matt, there's an article by a guy, it's Rands in Repose is the blogger, and he writes about stables versus volatiles. And it's about engineers being, either a stable or a volatile. I'm going to apply this to the security industry for a minute here. The stable is the type of person that's like, hey, we need to write all the process in the world around this stuff. We need to document. We need to have controls in place. And the volatile is like, fuck all of that. Let's go patching right now. Like, we just got to get it done.
Right.
And like, to me, you need a healthy blend of that in the security industry, because process and documentation alone is great. Like, we need that. We absolutely need that. We need to know how we patch and all, when we patch and what disruption, what do we take down. But if you look at a lot of the breaches in the news today, like, a lot of that's still happening with the fundamentals missing. They weren't patching. They didn't have software deployed correctly. Like, there weren't a lot of doers. There were a lot of thinkers. And like, to me, it's a healthy blend of some of that. Like,
I like to say this: perfect is the enemy of good. Right. And I think I'm stealing this from Lombardi or somebody, I think. But ultimately, perfect is the enemy of good. And I had this engineer that was just like that, Marcin. He wanted to think about every single lateral aspect of it. He wanted to think about every depth he could think about, every breadth he could think about, come to every final point, get perfect out. And left to his devices, we'd be done in 2029. Right? and I don't mean, I don't mean to be hyperbolous, but it is pretty much that way. And yet sometimes you need to be able to actually take action. So when I teach my CIS class, I basically say, start where you are. Start with a shitty policy. Be cognizant of what you can deliver. And then go back and iterate and make it better and better and better and get those things going. But to your point, a lot of the stuff we see in the news is fundamentals aren't done. Like, even enterprise or SMB or M or E, it's all across the board. It's not any one sector. And it comes back to this kind of change, I think, that's happening. We won't get too far into it, Marcin, but in the beginning and up till now, it was release the software, make the money, release the software, make the money. Oh crap, security bug. Let's put that in the queue. Wait, new feature above security bug. And you start living that world where you're disincentivized by capitalism to fix the problems, because your maturity of your consumer is exactly your point. Big red button, gear down doesn't help, right? And so I think that we're seeing this shift in the understanding that these vendors and software providers often don't even have the most cursory of basic things in play in their CI/CD pipelines, let alone, but also even in their own computers and assets and software. And I've met security companies that follow that point. I've recently talked to a storage vendor that says, we're going to move to EDR now. Well, do you have a SOC? It's no, we don't really have budget for that. You hold people's stuff. You what? Anyways,
Look, we're all guilty of it. I'm the last to judge because I sure as hell know we've been guilty of it.
Myself too. I don't point this finger in a pejorative way. I mean,
yeah,
the industry is going to start rewarding security being part of the of the package, right?
Well, this job would be so easy if there were no people involved.
Right? It's all us that mess everything up, isn't it, Marcin?
Totally, myself included, right? It's like, how many times do I catch myself, signing up for a website and going, I just got to do this quickly and like reusing a password.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, right. Less now, but I definitely have been doing that in the past. In fact, what it ended up summating is, I think about 4 years ago, I said, I'm tackling this problem. I'm going to solve it. So I get my password manager, and I have literally used the same set of 5 passwords in like 1,000 places. That's just the ones that I had in my password manager.
I'm still cleaning it up. Still cleaning it up years
later. I'm almost done. Like at this stage, I've now got mostly random passwords across 99% of everything I think that exists. But
what the hell was 10 years ago Marcin thinking, right? Like,
right. But you know what? That's another great point, man. I think in life, if I don't look back last year and go, what the hell was I thinking? I'm not growing, right? And I think that is what it takes to stay on the forefront of cybersecurity. And back to what we talked earlier, I don't think that's going to be the charge for most SMBs. I don't think that's going to be the capabilities of most MSPs to have dedicated resources. That's all they do is live in that threat hunting, forward facing. And I think partnering with somebody else is going to be the key to it, right? I'll read this one out real quick, but says, tooling doesn't matter if you aren't explicitly working to enable the business and your clients to be successful. Preach it, 100%. Reliance on tooling alone leads to being the business prevention department. I agree with that, right? Like not tying into this understanding of how do I aid the business to move forward? How do I get real answers about an event so that I'm not sitting there wondering and I have someone to come in and say, no, we're good. We're moving this to false positive. We're going to put in the data that's necessary for this. Or, no, this is a real problem. We need to deal with this. We're going to isolate. We're going to take actions based on what you've allowed us to do. And I think that being able to enable business and have real decisions so that you aren't doing false positive lockouts. You talked about this earlier, Marcin, of people just get that alert fatigue, right? And I talk about this in a nursing home. There was a nursing home that had put in this bed system that would detect whenever a elderly patient got out of their bed at night, right? It was a semi-assisted take place. So they wouldn't fall. It was a fall prevention mechanism, right? So you could tell that they were out, so you could send someone to help them, and then you could tell if they'd fallen. But it was buggy. It was IR based, and it was like looking at you moving, and it was AI kind of, and it sucked. It went off like 1,000 times an hour. And eventually they got sued because a patient fell and broke their hip, and they didn't do anything because they ignored the pager system, right? They had been getting these false alerts for so long, they just went, it's nothing, boom, boom, nothing, right? And never checked. And I think you're pointing at human behavior that doesn't just stay in cyber, that doesn't just stay in technology, right?
Well, I think somebody had it in the comments, the boy who cried wolf. And that's exactly the story we've been told, right? And yet here we are and ignoring all the alerts. There it is.
Exactly. Just had Tom Bishop pop that in there, 100%. Yeah. So let's, we're getting towards this last 15 minutes or so of this. If anybody has any questions, we got one. We'll pop this in here. And then we'll get on to my favorite snake oil. And we'll chat about that. But how does the VC model of growth fit into this conversation? Like, what does venture capital do? What does venture capital do to a growing organization? And I have my thoughts, but you probably have some very of your own thoughts, Marcin. But how does this play into? And this came up when we were talking about software and it getting more secure over time as vendors play in.
Yeah, of course, we're venture backed, so I can speak from experience. But unfortunately, my experience is that of a security company, and so security is kind of important. So we never had, what you would think. As we cast the budget every year, security was never controversial. Like, this is what we're going to invest in the security and the IT function and SDLC and SRE, et cetera. But I know of friends where security is just bottom of the totem pole because marketing, sales, got to keep growing. So it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I guess the positive of all the stuff in the news that we've seen is board members, many of which are venture capitalists, especially on venture-backed companies. Sometimes the board is just all venture capitalists.
Yep.
Understand the risks, or starting to understand the risks.
Starting to. Yeah.
Many have investments in security because it's such a hot space, so they're understanding that even more. So, I don't know. I feel like it's not necessarily that as a symptom. It's more just
Yeah.
the general underinvestment and misunderstanding of what security is and what we need, right? Whether you're
100%.
VC backed or not, right? So,
All right. Well, I don't have to say anything else. You hit that one. So we'll
oh,
move on
good.
to the next question. Yeah. And I think I've seen it shift. I've seen private equity start to ask questions around security I've never thought they would ask. And it's being driven by the insurance markets. It's being driven by that totally. Somebody knows what I'm about to talk about. I just saw it pop up down there. But okay. So this one, Shield Network says, yesterday was EDR, today it's MDR, which really is just a symptom of EDR not being managed by the people, in my opinion. Tomorrow will be something else. How do you, Matt, and Malwarebytes help prepare MSPs to understand and help their clients understand this evolution? I like to do it this way. I do a lot of speaking engagements. I do a lot of actually talking to end clients. So I'm actually doing that I'll be rushing in 15 minutes to tear down my equipment and get 20 minutes across town to go speak to a set of end clients, 40 or so end clients. And I talk about it this way. I ask them, are they in business? Yeah, you idiot. Does your business change? Yes. Does your business line change substantially or even maybe minorly over time? Well, yes. Great. These threat actors are in business. They're going to make money. They're going to extract money, so much so that you already have, and I describe the landscape of where ransomware has even gone. If you look at initial access brokers, people just break in and then sell it, and then you have the people that then elicit the payload or maybe sell to a nation state player, or you have this whole people that are doing discovery of what new vulnerabilities, and you just talk about the breadth of it as if it's a business, and they're there to extract ROI, right? And you point out that, I love to point out that that's going to keep changing their tactics. You've got to keep changing what you do. You know, a long time ago in the 60s, you didn't lock your doors, but then you lock your doors, and now you put on bars sometimes if you're in the wrong neighborhood. Now you put on alarm systems, and you have a dog and a shotgun. Well, we used to just not lock our doors. Great. Crime happens. And when it changes, that's part of what we look at here. And these threat actors are in business to make money. They're in profit mode. And so it will keep changing. To the point of how you help them understand, it's really more and more that we as the service providers take on a lot of that onus. And here's what I'm saying. If you look at the National Cybersecurity Strategy, I know it's a strategic document. It's not an actionable document. But it definitely says we got to push this to the service providers. We need to take the smarter people and make them more responsible. If you look at the SEC last year, they came up and made a proposed regulation to say you have to have your board members actually have a cyber person representing. Why? Well, because when they did that with Sarbanes-Oxley, so they put those nice little pretty cuffs on them after they made the wrong decision knowingly based on their capabilities, right? We're seeing this shift, I think, to the point, Shield, the question you're asking. It's just a lot of grunt work and education, and that's what we're doing, both to MSPs and Malwarebytes in the same way. That's why Marcin's here today, is to educate and talk about these things. But I have a lot of hope and belief that the very fact that you're sitting here listening, the very fact that people are consuming this content on a pretty regular basis means that we're going to win. We're going to get there. We're going to get to where we understand this. We can articulate it. We can actually do these things with our clients. We can say, it's my job to stay on top of it. I'm going to keep changing because they're going to keep changing. Let's move forward, right? Sometimes that's money. Sometimes it's not. But you need to invest in cybersecurity. So, all right, I'll get off my dang high horse. I'll fall and break my neck. But anything to add to this question, Marcin, of what Malwarebytes is doing?
Yeah, great. I think not just Malwarebytes, but every vendor in the space has some sort of blog, and just bookmarking a couple of those and reading stuff that interests you as we talk about the evolution. Like, it's pretty. We also have emergency ransomware kits, stuff like that. Pretty good content, like not just Malwarebytes, but across the space. A lot of vendors have really good stuff to read. And
Hunter's a bunch of people crushing these things, right?
Yeah.
So for sure, it's awesome. Great point. And I think that's the point. I think it's our job as vendors to educate. I think it's our job as we do this to take that knowledge set and bring in enough information for people to grow themselves, right? And I learned this from, I think, Bob Coppedge. He said, when people watch your show, Matt, they don't watch it for you to be a hero. They watch it so they can be a hero. And that's 100% stuck with me, right? And I think that's the point, is people are here to learn and grow, and I just want to provide what knowledge I have to do that. And that means I have to keep changing and learning my knowledge and playing with things and learning attacks and doing those things. All right, so I know Roddy just wrote, "I love vendors who," and then left it unopened. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But for now, let's get to what presciently was called out by LinkedIn user who was unknown. XDR, right? And let's talk about this, Marcin. I'll fire the opening salvo and let you go from there. But
all right.
I think the challenge I have is that oftentimes marketing drives our terms more than actual pragmatic discussion of what this does. That is a torque wrench. That is right? We don't have that. We have marketing terms. That is a nut application device in the nut turning bolt, right? Instead of this just real succinct actual data on what we do. But XDR, in my mind, is showing how little we understand about that kind of what else there is, right? And so when you think about it, There's vendors that call XDR extended detection response for network, where they now isolate other devices. There's people that go into the identity aspect and cloud CASB type-esque things that are out there. You have a lot of different ways XDR is used and applied. And so I like to say right now, it's kind of like when vendors first said they had AI. And when vendors first said we have AI protection, machine learning, which really was a Yarrow rule, right? Let's just be completely blunt. So,
or worse.
Or worse, right? Fair. What are your thoughts on XDR, man? Like, what is the X in XDR, or just in general? I'd love to hear you just speak about it.
Set me up, why don't you?
I did.
Look, let's put the marketing bullshit aside.
Yeah.
XDR is an attempt to pull in other elements of the environment, like identity, network, email, endpoint.
Wasn't that a SIM? Sorry.
Like I said, marketing bullshit aside, it is an attempt to pull in all of those capabilities and act on them, right? So like, and I feel like, if you look at Malwarebytes from an XDR perspective, we specialize in endpoint. And so we would look at those other elements from other vendors. Your email provider, we don't provide email, right? Your network provider, we don't do network. Your identity, provider, we don't do identity. And educate our product, inform our product in a better way. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's awesome. If I can get more visibility from our perspective, the endpoint perspective, based on everything else that's happening, awesome. Call it XDR if you want.
Yeah. I do agree with you, though. Here's what I'm thinking in my mind. If I was trying to take away the marketing term, you're shifting from this, I'm going to build a SIEM, or a security intelligence event manager, that's going to bring in these templates, and it's going to know that I'm on a WatchGuard, so these logs look like that, and it's going to know that I'm on this, so these logs look like that, and we're going to bring it together, make actionable. That is that enterprise focus on how we deliver security in that way. And it's a control, right? It's in the deeper IG2s and IG3s, but it's a control, and it's there for a reason. But MDR is bridging that gap for small to mid-sized business, XDR in their definition.
If I don't have some of the identity data, my MDR actually becomes less effective, right? And so to me, it's enriching our data.
And that's what I was getting to, right? Is that you're now saying, what are those core components I need to have understanding of when dealing with an incident? If an incident comes in and I have this, I might want to know that it's not an infrastructural thing. This isn't a computer. It's not a computer. This is Matt Lee's fingertips to the world of my technology, my data. I really care more about it being Matt Lee. I really care about knowing that Matt Lee has access to these other sensitive things, and maybe now we need to take some identity response. And maybe now we need to take, because I'm going to steal your token while I'm there. I'm going to take your OAuth token. I'm going to be you. How do you now, as an MDR service, take advantage of this understanding that there's more, but these people don't have this giant SIEM capability with extensible SOAR architecture that's going to be built out of humans. They're going to deal with it. And I think that it comes into really XDR in my mind is an attempt to say MDR wasn't enough. EDR wasn't enough. We're not touching the other components. We don't have the other enrichment data. We don't know that this was an email delivered. We don't know, right? And if you look at it, for me, one of those things that's playing that way is Microsoft Defender and Defender for Office. They are very well laying in, still just calling it Defender, a lot of data around that side. And so I think you're hitting the nail on the head, Marcin. That's what it is.
Matt, another way to say it is endpoint's not enough.
It's true story.
A means to an end, right? It's
exactly.
Do I want to pop the network? Do I want to move to another endpoint?
Yeah.
And if you don't have the visibility of those other components, then it's just very endpoint specific, and that's not going to help you. I mean, lots of attacks happen without endpoint involvement. Lots of attacks happen starting from an endpoint moving beyond. So XDR, again, whether we love the term or not, whether it was created by the industry or not, it's
Thanks for letting me rant, Marcin. I had to.
I do this in my dreams usually. Glad we could speak outward about it. But look, I think it's got its marketing aside, it's got its positives, right?
Yeah. All right, I've got to go to Roddy on this one because he's speaking from my soul on this. He says, I love vendors who educate first and sell last. That's the way it's going, Roddy. That's where it's shifting to it better, at least in my presence. It's the antithesis of what we think about sales. But personally speaking, it's about trust first. And, I got into it. You've triggered me now, Roddy. We're going to do this in a sec. Maybe we have a few minutes. It's how we approach our clients, and the foundation of that partnership has to be based on trust. True. And I got into this kind of back and forth discussion with the guest on my last game, a good friend of mine, Brian. He said, do people want to trust their vendor or have faith in their vendor? And I have an interesting aspect and thought on that. And I think there's a little bit of semantics in the words that are playing out. But when you think about faith, it's not knowing, but still trusting. where trust is something established from data in my mind, right? Trust is kind of one of those things, and it's ephemeral. Trust can't be permanent. Let's just get to that point. But the point is, I think with vendors, you want to see that they're outwardly talking about things and somehow are presenting that they're inwardly doing the things, right? And I think that is what we take on faith right now. We say we really like this vendor. They must be doing a good job with security, but I get to see it from the other lens, and a lot of them aren't. Right. And that's the reality of it. And I think it's interesting, but great call out, Roddy. I 100% think that's the way it's shifting to. Gone are the flashy sales presentations as the way you sell product, education first. And then after that, we'll establish trust. And as that goes, right?
Everybody on this call has been burned before, where like great marketing, great sales pitch, then they finally buy the product that sits on the shelf.
Oh my God, this is terrible. Yeah.
And like, you know, this is actually a big benefit for Malwarebytes, because ultimately people go back to like, what did we use to remediate that one time a long time ago? And it's like our consumer product. And now they find out we have an MSP business and all that. But like,
it's totally awesome.
A great anecdote to this is like HubSpot.
Sure.
If you Google things like, you know, how do I market my company, this and that, you will find HubSpot articles that all they do is try to help you, educate you.
Yeah, and not even about their tool. Not click here, do this, but here's the things you need to be doing.
There may be a soft pitch on the bottom that says like, by the way, we automate all this. Like you can just buy HubSpot, but like you don't have to. That's how we buy things nowadays. That's how we find useful information on the web.
YouTube, right? It's the YouTube community these days. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. You nailed it, Roddy. 100%. Shield, we'll cross out with this last one, and we'll get on with it. But isn't XDR just another unmanaged tool like EDR? Shouldn't we be talking about XDR in combination with SOC services? I like to say it this way. I think we shouldn't be talking about anything R. I think we shouldn't be talking about anything buzzword. I think as a community, my doctor doesn't get into, you know, the buzzwords of this. They get into the peptide uptake and what happens when you do this or don't take that. And I think that's what we need to be more in tune to as MSPs, as service providers out there, these SMBs, that we need to go out and actually talk about things from a commonality of understanding. Like if we look at frameworks as an example, or you know, the safeguards in CIS or whatever, they actually give very prescriptive data about what we should be doing to protect ourselves. If you go look at that and it says have an EDR, right? It kind of doesn't exactly, though, say the other part of this, which is be able to use it effectively. And I think that's where the M of MDR comes in, is make sure you have the people in your organization or partner with externals or partner with scale providers that can do this so that you can actually do that part of it well, in my opinion. But I think talking about things in buzzwords is what makes us dumber. And I think that's what needs to stop. We need to talk about them in our efficacy and what we're doing, what we're attempting to stop and do. And that means that we have to be more and more educated as an industry. And I think, you know, ending that, some of this challenge, Marcin, in my opinion, is there is no barrier to entry to provide these services today. And so anyone can get in. And so the efficacy scale is going to be drastically different. But vendors are starting to normalize that, right? If you use an MDR service, even if you aren't super sophisticated yourself, at least at the endpoint and hopefully extension out into identity layers, you've got people that are smarter at doing that and that are paid well for that effort, if that makes sense. Any closing thoughts, Marcin? We got 2 more minutes and we're going to close out, and I'm going to rush over to a restaurant and go do this again somewhere. So.
Just as it pertains to the last question, I agree wholeheartedly. XDR is just like EDR. It's another unmanaged, you know, tool service with more data, so it adds a level of complexity, right? And so in the context of MDR, you know, having somebody you can call. And that's my closing thought is, if you haven't thought about MDR, it's time. It's time to look at who in the space could be providing this. And trust me, having somebody that will call you when something's happening, fix it for you, and then give you a postmortem is a lot better than you scrambling, unplugging things out of the wall and being in a really bad situation. Those insights are invaluable, and it will save your bacon one day. And, you know, there are many vendors out there to go evaluate, and always happy to lend a ear, and not just Malwarebytes, but like tell you what I think works in the industry, what does not.
Marcin, you're awesome. I appreciate your humility and just willingness to come on and chat with just some random guy who loves to scream about cybersecurity. So
I shouldn't have shaved this morning. I keep doing that every time.
Beard Banter. We had a prerequisite, Marcin. We had a prereq.
I think I did this last time. So
you did. It's okay, brother. I'll forgive you. Lawrence, we'll end on that. Great info, guys. Miss you, Marcin. Must be somebody that knows you. But
I went to high school with that guy.
That's so cool. I bet he could tell some stories. Note to self. Anyways.
Yeah, let's disconnect now. Why don't we?
We're done. Thank y'all so much for being here.
Thanks, Matt.